When you talk about the communication side of pay increases, and if you're in an organization who's using a merit matrix and likely with position and range included, what are your thoughts on how much transparency there should be? Should the organization be showing this matrix to line managers if they're not involved directly in this decision, and ultimately the employees getting the increase, to say, here's where you plotted in the matrix, and so here's, does that is that taking the easy way out to some degree, or is that something that actually helps in the conversation?
With effective communication, some level of transparency with the merit matrix can be a positive thing. You made the point, and we've made the point, you don't want to necessarily just put the sheet on the piece of paper and say, okay, here's where you are, this is what you get. On the other hand, the merit matrix is a pretty clear indication that any employee can look at, and it doesn't take them too long to do the math to say, if I perform better, given a level that I'm at within the salary range, I am going to get a higher increase if I'm a higher performer. That's a great message, and I think whether that's on paper, whether the manager or the CEO is talking about that, whether you have both, you probably would be better to be more transparent in terms of your merit matrix than less transparent, as long as you're not just substituting a positive conversation with the employee and just pointing your finger to a box on the matrix and saying, this is what you got, send the next person in.
Well, if we go back to those higher performers who are also higher in the range, are there any tips for having those conversations, again, using the merit matrix as your tool? How do you effectively convey to those folks that performance still is key, that they're not being punished or penalized because they're higher in range, and what other opportunities need to start to come into the conversation if they're maybe approaching the maximum for their position?
Most employees have a pretty fair understanding that most merit budgets are finite. There's only so much in the pool that we can spend, and that as an organization, it's also important for us to manage costs. I don't think it's too much of a stretch for employees to understand the basic premise of, the market rate is this, which is the midpoint if that's where you set them. You're 20%, 25, 30% over that amount, and so the fact that we have, let's say, a 3% merit budget and you're a top performer and you're getting 3%, that doesn't mean that you're getting the same increase as someone else, because the other element that's baked into that pie is that while most employees aren't 25% over market, you are. And even though your pay has gone up over market considerably, we still think that it's a prudent decision to continue to give you a solid increase in your pay. The other thing you mentioned, it does pose a problem for some organizations, but for most organizations, they have positions targeted and set at various salary ranges within the organization. Employees need to understand that there is only so much we're going to pay for an accountant or an administrative assistant or sales manager. There is a limit as to what we can pay. And so I think it's incumbent on managers and people who supervise employees that are getting high in the range to start to have those conversations with those employees to say, you are approaching the range, you continue to perform well, but we need to start thinking about you assuming more responsibility, going into a higher level role where we can then get a little bit more salary range to use.
Well, with a merit matrix, being that it's a tool to use to decide individual pay increases, I think sometimes it's too narrowly focused, at least the thinking about it. And from what I hear you saying, it's really a tool to manage salaries and total pay in general. And it can be a tool for communication as well. And it seems like often we have these conversations and we very, very often end up talking about the communication element. So that's a really important piece, it sounds like, to the success success of a merit matrix.
Right, and one thing Alison I failed to mention is on the compensation administration side of the house, a merit matrix is a extremely valuable tool, because that's the tool that they're using to actually build the budget on the front end. So they're doing various iterations. They are looking at the past performance ratings of their employees. We know which employees are at which level in their ranges, and so we can make a pretty accurate forecast of how many employees at what different salary levels are going to probably fall within each. And it's a very valuable tool then to model various budgets, various increases based on performance and position and range. And so it's a helpful tool on the front end. Hopefully it's a helpful tool on the back end as the managers use it to allocate their increases.
Well, I know your perspective on the use of this tool with budgeting, with setting the increases, as well as communicating to employees is going to be really helpful for our listeners. For World at Work, I'm Allison Avalos.